In 1995, Power Rangers put out a movie that made $66 million. 2 years later, they put out another one. It made 9.6. That's not a typo. In 2 years, the biggest kids franchise on the planet lost more than 80% of its movie audience. 16% of critics gave that second film a good review. And the season it kicked off, Power Rangers Turbo, is the one a lot of fans quietly point to as the moment the whole thing nearly fell apart. The low point. The year everybody checked out. And here's the part that gets me. The one guy who maybe could have steadied that sinking ship, the original Red Ranger, the leader who literally started all of this, was right there, alive in the story, not retired off to some other planet, right there. And the closest he ever got to Turbo was getting his brains scrambled by the villain and dragged around as a hostage the other Rangers had to go rescue. So today, I want to run the tape on the timeline we never got. What if Jason Lee Scott came back, not as a cameo, not as a hostage, but as the Red Turbo Ranger, to lead the team through the worst year Power Rangers ever had? Could the guy who started it all have saved it? I'm your host, and okay, full disclosure, I have argued about Turbo in far too many comment sections to be objective here. But let's do this properly. Quick ground rule, because I take this seriously. This is a what if. So everything up front, what Turbo really was, who really led it, how it really went, that's all true. That's the real history. Then once we've got the real story straight, we rebuild it with Jason in the driver's seat. Real first, fantasy second. Deal? But before we go any further, I genuinely want to hear from you on this one, because it's the whole heart of the video. If you could reach back into Power Rangers history and pull one retired Ranger out of the vault to come lead a team that's falling apart, who are you picking? Is it Jason, the original? Is it Tommy? Somebody weirder, deeper that nobody expects? Drop that name in the comments and tell me why. Be specific, make your case, because I read these, and the best answers I will genuinely turn into their own videos on this channel. That's a promise. Okay, let's talk about what Turbo actually was. Power Rangers Turbo aired in 1997. It's the 5th chapter of the whole franchise, and it kicked off in a really unusual way, with a movie. A theatrical film, Turbo, a Power Rangers movie, that led straight into the show. In it, Zordon and Alpha 5 hand the team a brand new set of turbo powers, car-themed, race car energy, the whole thing, to go fight a new villain, a loud, campy space pirate named Divatox. And at the start, the leader is Tommy Oliver, Red Turbo Ranger, the most famous Ranger there is. So on paper you'd think, okay, we're fine, we've got Tommy. But this is where Turbo starts making some really bold, really risky swings. Swing number 1. The new Blue Ranger is a 12-year-old, a literal child. His name's Justin, and he's the youngest human ranger the show has ever had, before or since. The idea was basically to give the kids watching at home somebody their own age to see themselves in. A little audience stand-in. When he morphs, he magically becomes adult-sized, so he can fight. And look, some fans love Justin. But putting a middle schooler on the front line of your flagship team? That tells you exactly who Turbo was chasing. It was getting younger. On purpose. And then comes swing number 2, and this one is wild. Because partway through the season, not the finale, the middle, Power Rangers did something it had never done before. It looked at its entire veteran team and said, "You're done." In a 2-part episode called Passing the Torch, episodes 18 and 19, the mentor Demetria tells Tommy and Adam and Tanya and Kat to each pick a successor and hang up their powers. And they do. Mid-season, the show fires its whole main cast and hands the entire franchise to 4 people you have never seen before. Those 4 newcomers, plus Justin, the kid who stays, become the new team. TJ takes over as the new Red Ranger and leader. Carlos goes green, Ashley, yellow, Cassie, pink. And here's a genuinely important piece of history in that swap, one that deserves way more credit than it gets. TJ, played by Selwyn Ward, was the first African-American Red Ranger in the entire franchise. That's a real milestone. Hold on to it, because it matters a lot when we get to the what if. So that's the real Turbo. A show that got a kid, dumped its whole cast overnight, and asked its audience to fall in love with 4 strangers halfway through the year. Bold. Genuinely bold. But now let me show you why so many of us call this the low point. Because the numbers were already sliding, and they were sliding before Turbo even started. The wiki puts it plainly, going all the way back to the previous season, Zeo, the ratings had started to plummet. And the reason is almost funny, if you lived through it. Power Rangers wasn't losing to some other action show. It was losing to Dragon Ball Z, which hit America in 1996 with sharper, faster fights. And it was about to lose a whole generation to Pokémon. Kids had new obsessions, and Power Rangers suddenly looked like last year's thing. That's the real reason a 12-year-old got added to the team. They were scrambling to win the little kids back. And behind the camera, it was rough too. The original cast was burning out. Reportedly, the pay and the conditions weren't great, and one by one, the veterans wanted out. Jason David Frank, Tommy himself, was, by the accounts out there, the first to want to leave. And, eventually, the studio just decided to clear the whole board and start fresh. That's what Passing the Torch really was. Not just a story beat, but the show quietly showing its entire original family the door. Put it all together. Sliding ratings, a $9.6 million movie next to a $66 million one, a total cast exodus, and you get a franchise that, in 1997, genuinely looked like it might be running out of road. That's the Turbo a lot of us remember. Not bad, exactly. Just tired. Like the air going out of the balloon. Which brings us back to the guy who wasn't there. Because think about who Jason Lee Scott is. He's the original Red Ranger, Austin St. John, the first leader this whole thing ever had. The steady, serious, everybody follows him, center of the original team. He left Mighty Morphin the way a lot of the early cast did. Written out, sent off to a peace conference in Switzerland after the actors ran into contract disputes behind the scenes. And here's the cruel little detail. Jason did come back once, in Zeo, the season right before Turbo, as the Gold Ranger. But those gold powers, they weren't built for a human being. They were literally draining his life force the whole time he wore them. And in the end, he had to give them back just to survive. So by the time Turbo rolls around, the original Red Ranger has already had his hero comeback poisoned out from under him. And then, in the Turbo movie, he shows up one more time, but not as a ranger. He's a powerless civilian who gets captured and brainwashed by the bad guys, turned against the team, and has to be saved. That is the closest Jason Lee Scott ever got to Turbo. He never appeared in the series at all. So sit in that with me for a second. The franchise's original leader, the guy fans trusted most, spent Power Rangers' worst years sidelined, powerless, or brainwashed. And I can't stop thinking, what if he hadn't been? What if right as the show started to sink, Jason morphed back one more time, as the Red Turbo Ranger, to lead? Okay, that's the divergence. From here on, we're in the timeline that never happened. And I'm going to be honest every step about what's real and what's me dreaming. So, picture it. In this version, when Zordon hands out those turbo powers, the red one doesn't go to a Tommy who's already halfway out the door. It goes to Jason. And immediately, Turbo has the one thing the real season never had, a veteran anchor, a leader with actual history. Think about what Jason walked through before this. Rita Repulsa, Lord Zed, the Machine Empire. This is a guy who has stared down the heaviest villains the franchise ever built. So, when this campy, cartoonish space pirate Divatox rolls up with her torpedoes and her one-liners, in my head, Jason doesn't blink. And that contrast, a deadly serious original hero against a joke of a villain, could have regrounded the whole show, given it some weight again. Reminded everybody that under the goofy car stuff, this was still Power Rangers. But here's the part of the fantasy I actually love most. Remember the passing of the torch? In the real show, it's 4 strangers handing power to 4 other strangers. Emotionally, it's kind of hollow. You barely know these people. Now imagine that same moment, but it's Jason, the original Red Ranger, kneeling down, personally handing the red mantle to TJ, the first black Red Ranger in franchise history. Suddenly, That milestone isn't a quiet mid-season swap nobody noticed. It's the founder of the whole thing blessing the future with his own hands. That is the passing of the torch Turbo deserved. That would have been iconic. And in this timeline, it hits like a freight train. So, could Jason have saved Turbo? Here's where I have to be straight with you, because I'm not going to sell you a fairy tale. No, not really, not the way we mean it, because Jason couldn't have outpunched Dragon Ball Z. He couldn't have made a $9.6 million movie suddenly gross $60 million. Nostalgia doesn't fix a ratings war, and one red suit doesn't beat Pokémon. The forces sinking Turbo were way bigger than any one Ranger. But could he have saved something? Yeah, I think he saves the feeling. He gives that season a spine. A reason for the older fans, the ones who grew up on the original 5, to keep showing up, week after week, instead of drifting off to the next thing. Turbo, in the real timeline, was a freefall. Jason turns it into a bridge, something you hold on to while the franchise figures out its next move. And here's the beautiful irony, the thing that makes this what-if bittersweet instead of just sad. Power Rangers didn't need Jason to save it, because it saved itself. 1 year later, In Space showed up, a season the critics actually loved, one of the best the show ever made, and it gave the franchise a future instead of an ending. The rescue was real. It just came from the future, not the past. So maybe that's the truest version of this fantasy. Jason wasn't the cure. In Space was. Jason's the guy who could have held the door open long enough for the cure to arrive, so that fewer of us gave up before the good part. So now I want to hear from you, straight up. Would Jason have saved Turbo, actually turned it around? Or would he just have delayed the inevitable, a familiar face on a ship that was still going down? Tell me where you land in the comments, and make your case, because I'm reading them. And if you've got any love left for the season everybody dunks on, do me a favor, hit that like button. It genuinely helps this stuff reach more people who grew up on it. And subscribe, because I'm out here rebuilding the timelines Power Rangers never gave us, one what-if at a time. The original Red Ranger, the worst year the show ever had, and the two of them never got to meet. Sit with that one.